Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm happy to welcome in Ann Rinkie. She is the president and CEO of Transportation Intermediaries Association, aka the TIA. This guest has been a long time goal for me. So, Ann, welcome into the show.
Hey, I am so happy to talk to you. Thank you so much, Blythe. Everyone loves you. Everyone loves you.
That's a great thing to hear. And I absolutely did not tell you to say that before the show because we were sitting here talking about football for probably a good 20 minutes. You're a Commanders fan, I'm a Jaguars fan, so we have lived in a little bit of not a little bit, a lot of strife and aggravation from these two godforsaken teams. But it looks like the last year was actually a little bit of improvement for both squads. So hopefully, you know, the trajectory is going up because I don't know how much further these two teams can go down.
We've hit the bottom.
Now, when I was doing prep for this interview, I was really fascinated by the fact that you used to work in rail before coming to the brokerage side. So for folks who may not be familiar with your career background, can you give us a little bit of insight on your past career in rail and how it eventually brought you into the freight brokerage world?
Sure. So I used to work for CSX, which is headquartered near you in Jacksonville, Florida. And I did their government affairs for the entire 16 years I was there. The last 8 of those 16 years, I headed up the Federal Affairs Office. So that means you go up to Capitol Hill and you say, Congressman, blah, 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 and then you work with the federal regulators and you talk about all the issues that are of importance. As you know, the railroads are heavily regulated, so there's always lots of issues to talk about. I left in 2019. You may have, since you were in Jacksonville, you may have seen that there was a whole bunch of stuff happening to CSX around that time, which is now, fast forward to today, all in the headlines about railroads, generally speaking, about changing their model, cutting costs, blah, blah, blah. So I left during the cutting cost period of CSX. And I thought, you know what, rail doesn't have to be my identity. I can try other things. So the U.S. Department of Transportation called me up, asked if I wanted to work for them. I'd never worked for the government. I tried it out. It's a great thing to do. It's wonderful people are there. It was not for me, but it broadened my horizon. I got exposed to a lot of different other things, including brokerage, motor carriers, and that's when I had this TIA opportunity come to me, and I thought, well, this is fabulous. Let me try it. Let's see what I can do. And I'm so glad I did, because having an experience with railroads and then into an entrepreneurial, very fast moving, very humble and really kind of like no barriers to entry. So they're really just trying to make it go and scale up and serve their customers. It was a huge contrast and a welcome one.
And so when you find yourself coming into the freight brokerage world, in one of the interviews, shout out to Trucking for Millennials, great podcast episode you did with them. Now, you had mentioned that you had spent about 6 months, just calling different people within the industry. I'm curious as to what you learned, because as a marketer, that's kind of like what you do when you first go into a new company, is you just talk to a bunch of different customers in order to get a real good feel, a good lay of the land. It sounds like that's exactly what you did for the TIA. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, and I really let them guide the agenda, so that I just basically said, tell me your experience. Tell me what your experience is with business, with TIA. And so it's interesting. Some people focused on, here's the issues that I think affect brokers and how we need to change them. And some focused on, here's the issues I see at TIA and how we need to change them. And, all valid, not all possible necessarily, or not all achievable within, the first 3 years of starting at TIA, but certainly welcome perspective. And I guess the broadest theme that I felt from those I talked to, and yes, these people were recommended to me to talk to. So, a little bit of sort of bias there, but was their genuine love for the industry and for the TIA. And that to me is significant enough, important enough that we have to keep that.
And so when you're coming into the TIA, you're talking to a lot of your core people and finding out where the struggles are, where the issues are. What was some of those first big things that you tackled that were really important to tackle?
Yeah, and one of those things was something that we're seeing crop its ugly head up again was when I first started, was October of 2020. And if you recall, May of 2020, there was a trucker protest in front of the White House about, bottoming out depression era level freight rates. That the trucker community seemed to think that was the broker's fault. The fact that there was a global pandemic notwithstanding seemed to be kind of not within their focus or their purview. Now, the last 2.5 years, we haven't heard much about it because freight market rates went bonanza, and the carriers, because the capacity was so tight, had so much leverage. We're hearing about it now, in my view, because freight rates are down again, and there's a little bit of a freight slump, not a depression, I'd say, a freight slump. It's gotten back to reality, and so we're hearing about it again. And so that to me was an interesting way to start, because I remember one of the first emails I received was, you better not try to get rid of 371.3C. And I was like, I don't even know where I go to the bathroom. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, wait, what was 371C? Is that what you?
Yeah, so it's this very, very arcane 80s regulation that really is the subject of the debate. Whether somehow it's going to be fix the problems of America if owner operators see exactly what the inputs are of all our transactions with shippers.
That's right. The rate transparency. That's where they were, wanting to know exactly how much brokers are making from their customers, but it's also the customers that are setting the rates. So it's kind of, your drivers, you can't really demand a third party in order to showcase what their profit margins are, and their certain, I don't know, an entire financial statement would probably be required in order to do that. And that just creates a nightmare for the manufacturer or the shipper.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that is our point, which is this is data from the shipper. It's their proprietary data. And so if that's get out to the open, you're talking about like, all right, so Coca-Cola sees what Pepsi's doing. I don't know if either party wants to see that. Regardless, it's not our data to reveal, right? It is their data. And furthermore, we're not asking for anyone else's data. We're not asking how many owner operators pay dispatch services, which may or may not be brokering freight, right? We're not asking for that. The fact is that this is it was sort of like a solution in search of a problem.
And so you didn't have to, I guess, or maybe you had to tackle that initially. And so then I guess maybe you kind of go into after that initial issue pops up, which is now popping up again. But in the meantime, what does, I guess, sort of a typical day or a typical week look like for you? Do you have a typical week in this industry?
No. You don't have a typical week either, right, Blythe?
Right. There is no such thing.
There is no such thing. The best laid plans, right? I would say, well, one other thing, I started during COVID, right? So I had to call people. I couldn't visit people. We didn't have any events. We didn't have any meetings. We just met online. That was the advent of the online meeting, which some have been successful, many have not. Thank goodness we don't have to rely on that anymore because we have a big one coming up. But, what the typical day at that point was just intake. Nowadays, it's really how I can get out and meet the membership, how I can get our messages out, how I can help the team develop strategies to make sure we've got member engagement, that we have, the right messages going out from a communications front, from a government affairs front, and from a meetings perspective. How do we get people to make sure that we have good educational opportunities at the meetings, that people attend, that they're happy, that we have sponsorships, all of that stuff. So every day is different. I would love to do a pie chart. I don't know if you've ever done this exercise of a pie chart of how I spend my day or how I spend my week. And if I could really document it in real time, I don't know how I would do that. But it would be, I think each week it would be one thing would be different. Like meetings would be the bulk of it one week, and government affairs would be the bulk of it the other week. You know what I mean? So it changes every day.
It's like the cell phone report that you get at the end of each week, and it's super depressing, and you just see how much time you spent on your cell phone. Some of those things I don't want to know, but there's nothing like the reality check that is the screen report that comes in once a week. Now, you had mentioned something about the government affairs, division, and I've always been fascinated by this because you spent a lot of time working closely with government, and you're located in Washington. So tell me a little bit about how, the TIA impacts or influences policy decision making. How does that process work from like a fifth grade level?
Sure. So, like, remember, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
You're too young for that, Blythe.
No, no, it's Schoolhouse Rocks or Schoolhouse Rock, right? Yeah, that's what
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, so it's a couple things. I mean, really, it's about education and relationships. So we have a lobbying team, and that's what they do. They go up on Capitol Hill to develop relationships first. And then, secondly, to educate. So you develop a relationship so people know who you are, what you stand for, and if you're an honest broker in the conventional sense of the word. And then you start educating them. And the reason is that there are, as you know, 535 members of Congress in the House and Senate. And they are supposed to be specialists in almost every issue that you can dream of. And can you imagine? How could they possibly? And so, as a consequence, you have all these various stakeholders who go up on Capitol Hill and educate them. God forbid if we weren't up there, I don't know what would be said about us. So, it's sort of incumbent on our lobbying team to go up there and say, here's this issue and here's how it affects us, both positively and negatively. And because we have such a good, honest team, they say, here's who's in favor of it, here's who's against it. Here on your committee would say no vote. Here on your committee who would say yes vote. And here's what we're doing to try to help educate the members on the committee.
How, I guess, educated is our government on how just transportation in general functions and works? Are they familiar with it loosely, or is it, maybe like a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I would say in varying degrees. There's some who get a 10 because they've either been on the committee for years or they have a transportation background. We have a couple members of Congress who either were brokers or had trucking, shops. And so they get it and they understand it. And that doesn't mean they're always in favor of what we want, but they at least understand kind of what we're talking about. Others, like I met with a member who I've known for a long time, and I talked all about what we do as an industry. And he said, I had no idea that you guys even existed. And so it just depends, right? And I would say one other thing about the pandemic, and you know this, that the pandemic brought into people's sort of public perception what goes into a supply chain and what a supply chain is. So I think there's a greater recognition of the role of the broker now than there perhaps would have been prior to the pandemic.
So it sounds like you're almost educating from both sides of the business. You're trying to educate these government officials who are responsible for passing these laws, but then also you have a responsibility to the members within the TIA to advise them as well. And there was one of the stats that I think you had said 80% of your membership has annual revenue less than 10 million. So when you're coming up with like what even to cover from an educational standpoint, how do you know what to cover for if it's varying that much where you have, 80%, I think it was 80% of the membership has less than 10 million, but then, 20% probably has significantly more. So I'd imagine that there's two sets of problems and education that needs to happen there. How does that happen and how does that get prioritized with the TIA?
Yeah, I think you're right to some extent because the smaller companies maybe have smaller, more basic needs and concerns. And they may not even be focused on advocacy, to be honest, because they're just focused on the day-to-day and how to make payroll. And the bigger companies, not that they have the luxury, but there's more at stake because they have more to lose. Should there be some onerous regulation. So I would say this, there is a commonality on the big ticket items. And so when I say the big ticket items, how double brokering, for example, or fraud in the marketplace, as we call it, affects the bottom line. And is sort of this hideous scourge that particularly affects smaller companies because that means they don't have the wherewithal necessarily to pay twice as a cost of doing business that a larger company does. And a larger company doesn't want to. So, but both of them are very concerned about that. Both of them are very concerned about rate transparency because they wonder what that's going to do for their relationships with their customers and with their shippers. Are they going to be sort of taken out of the entire transaction entirely, which, as you know, would be completely impractical. And then finally, the safety of the truck that they select, which is an issue that has not been resolved, that affects everybody equally too. So sort of the top three things that you hear about, they are broadly shared across the, GARs, the gross annual revenue categories.
And so you mentioned double brokering a couple times there. It feels like this is one of those things. 'Cause I wrote on this like back in like 2018, and it feels like this has been a problem that's always been around in the industry. But why has it? Why does it feel like it's so much worse of a problem now?
Yeah, I would like to not take credit for this, although I wish I could take credit for this. But one of my members explained it to me this way, and it made a lot of sense. The double brokering has always been around, but typically what double brokering was a carrier would double broker it to another carrier, and we would never know about it unless something really terrible happened. But it would go off, and that other driver would get paid, no issue, right? Nowadays, what is happening is it may not even be a carrier that we are talking to. It's a fraudulent entity. And that carrier may not even be talking to a broker. It's a completely fraudulent entity. The amount of fraud, spoofing, all of the above is really what has changed this dynamic. And part of that's a natural consequence, I think, of the digitization of freight. It just is, it's so much easier. Like we used to have to fax things. It's much harder to commit fraud when you got like fax stuff and you got like handwrite on things. But now it's just so much easier. And also there's so many more players in this space because of the massive amount of freight that we've seen over the last 2.5 years.
And also the barrier to entry is rather low, I think, for a lot of carriers versus brokers. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the vast population of drivers and carriers out there are those that are 10 trucks or fewer. Right? And so, yeah, it's a lifestyle that is certainly challenging, but it is, if you want to work for yourself, if you want to set your own hours, and you feel like this is the right job for you, that there are more and more entrants into that space. You're exactly right.
And so with TIA in general, you're responsible for, educating not only finding out what issues are plaguing the industry, but also then educating them on solutions to take that next step. So what are, I guess, maybe some solutions that the TIA is giving out to brokerages to avoid these kind of scams that are going on?
Yeah. So we wrote a white paper, and I know people don't read anymore, but I think people do. People do read this white paper. I apparently people just look at pictures and TikTok. But so, and in that white paper, it basically listed out like 15 or 20 red flags. And these red flags, like most of us would think about, like, let's say it's supposed to be a carrier they're talking to, but they only have a Gmail address, and you can't talk to the driver. They won't let you talk to the driver. And by the way, there's no visibility into where that truck is now or where it will end up. And there's no physical address. You don't even have a physical address for this company. So these are the kinds of things which, listen, if it's, Wednesday morning and you got all week, you can definitely look out for. It's when you get into trouble, when it's Friday afternoon and that load's got to move, that you're like, crap, I don't know this broker. I mean, I don't know this carrier, but I got to get this thing out. And that's when things like that can happen.
So it's almost like they're preying on, I guess, the natural habits of humankind. That, it's Friday, you want to get to the weekend, you don't want to have to worry about work over the weekend. So that's when they're probably getting taken advantage of a lot.
Yeah. And there are a lot of tools out there, electronic tools, freight tech is a huge burgeoning industry, as you know, but we also have our own tool, TIA Watchdog, which allows our members to make reports about various bad experiences that they have had with carriers or brokers who are not our members. And so that provides our membership an opportunity. All right, let me just check Watchdog, see if there's anything out there to be wary of.
Oh, I love that. And that's actually a great segue into the next sort of discussion topics that I wanted to dive into is, so from the TIA standpoint, whenever you are out, recruiting members, and so a new member comes to the association, what does that onboarding process look like for them? What can they expect to know and to learn or to engage with after they become a member?
Well, it's funny you say that, because what we try to do is a new member orientation. And so we're actually having one on Thursday. And so what that provides is, all right, what am I paying for? What are my dues going to? And you may have some sort of vague idea, or you may have scanned the website to have sort of an appreciation. But really, until you have someone who's worked here and explains all the various kind of resources you have access to, you don't really know. And so we're all motivated by different things. Some people are motivated because they are small and they don't want to hire a lawyer, but they see that we have a model contract with a carrier. And so they'll say, all right, well, I can use this as a basis for a contract that I used with my carriers. And some are sort of mid-tier, but they don't have an education team at their brokerage. And so they said, well, I can get this kind of education for myself, for the company with TIA. And then others join because of the advocacy that we've talked about. And then I think finally, the last thing is people are very aware of the meetings and networking, how to get together with everybody. We say it's the leading 3PL conference. Really, everybody who's in that industry, they all come to that conference. And so we provide these opportunities. And I said at the outset, our membership is very generous. They're very humble and entrepreneurial, and they're willing to share kind of best practices and where they've made mistakes and how they've sort of fixed them.
And that would be a sort of a great segue into the conference that's coming up in the middle of April, mid to late April. It's happening in Orlando, Florida. And so give us a sense of what folks can expect to learn or engage with or network, all of the fun conference things that go on at the TIA. Because I've never been to a TIA conference, but I'm trying to go to this one. I'm definitely going to the one in the fall, but I'm trying to come to this one.
You got to do it. Trey Griggs is going to be bereft if you're not there. You're his spirit animal.
So, shout out Trey Griggs, fellow creator in the logistics space, doing a lot of really cool things. I heard he's making he has a pretty good show that's going to be broadcasting live from down at the TIA. So that kind of it's sort of this not convoluted, but it's a great example of how you can bring together all of these different sectors of logistics and sort of the modern logistics environment in person together. So you got the creators, you got the practitioners, you got the managers, you got everybody that's in one space. And so is it really geared towards it's not one of those conferences that are geared towards just executives only. It's really for everyone, right?
Yeah. I mean, you are so kind as to give me leading questions, which I appreciate. But yes, you're exactly right. This is for everyone. The nice thing about it is that there are any number of different kinds of people who attend the conference. There are those who, I remember talking to this guy last year who had just started out, and he said, I learned how far behind I am. And so that's the fundamentals track is for that person. Then there's the legal track for those people very concerned about nuclear verdicts or cyber liability or fraud, and the spoofing that we've been seeing. We have this legal track. We also have sessions that we've never had before, one on ports. And you recall with the pandemic, everyone was focused on ports. And now we're in the midst of a port negotiation that seems to be interminable, never ending. And that's something that our members are concerned about because a lot of them have visibility into drayage. They have some customers there that rely on drayage or intermodal. And so what is the future of American ports, which is a separate issue that I can get sidetracked on. But it is concerning considering how unautomated we are compared to international ports, and whether or not we choose to do something about that, I don't know, but it's just something of interest. And then we're also having a session on sustainability, which is the first time we've done that. And that is huge, as you know, as people think about, all right, how do we save emissions? Some of them have a corporate requirement to think about sustainability. Some of them are just doing it out of their own volition. What does that look like if you're not an asset owner? What does that look like in terms of what your solution set is for sustainability? So we have a sort of a variety of things. And then we have these networking opportunities that give you, opportunity to socialize, talk to people, meet new people. And then, of course, we have the floor, the expo hall, which then you can get exposed to all the kind of new cool stuff that's out there in this space.
Love it. And so for folks who may not go to a lot of different conferences or maybe haven't been to one in a long time, what I kind of see as far as like an evolution within the industry is all of social media that all of these people are taking part in, and all of these online resources that are available. How do you sell the value of an association, of an in-person conference, when all of these other distractions are there? Is it almost like you have to use them to promote the association? Or how do you almost like combat against the freeness of social media versus a membership where you have to actively be, or is that maybe a selling point of the TIA where you can be an active member here instead of just a witness over on social media?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer your question. I hope I am.
I think I asked it right. I don't know if I did, but I can rephrase it.
but here's what I noticed is that the members that we had when we did those terrible online meetings. Sorry.
In the year that shall not be named.
In the year that shall not be named. You know, it was half-hearted. They weren't committed. Mm-hmm. And to your point, they got distracted. Mm-hmm. And it's far easier to get distracted by social media and to be sort of a passive participant in things when you're just sitting at your desk. Mm-hmm. It just is. And when you go to an event in person, the difference is palpable. And I because we just lived it, it's almost like I don't feel like I have to prove it. We just lived it. It was so terrible watching people speak on a all day long. You're not going to pay attention. You're just not. You'll be like, okay, I'll pay attention for an hour and a half, and then I can't. I got to do something else. And I'm not being pejorative of online, because a lot of times they meet a need, and you have to do it, and it's easier. You can't put on conferences, 12 months of the year. So I'm not trying to be pejorative about that. But there is a difference in having an in-person event. You get to have the X factor of meeting someone you may never have connected with. And, the fact that you have an opportunity to meet people who've been coming to TIA meetings for 45 years. We're in our 45th year, Blythe.
Wow.
Well, along with people who just started coming last year. It's to me, it's sort of like speaks for itself.
And it's interesting you
say
that.
Does that answer your question?
Because I do agree. Going to an in-person conference, you gather so much more information, because I think it's almost like a different world that you're putting yourself in. That when you're in your normal sort of everyday life, you're checking your phone, you're passively, watching, a YouTube video or a TikTok or something. But do you really retain that information? And I've actually heard of people who are making themselves read a book because their attention span is just so dramatically affected by all of these different apps that they find it challenging to read a book or to do one thing without picking up the phone or without, having some kind of distraction. So I think you're right. Whenever you do go to, and just based off, anecdotally my experience, when I do go to these conferences, you learn so much more. The networking is so much more powerful. Even the conversations, the podcasts I record, I love these. Great conversation with you. But in person, if you're talking to somebody for 45 minutes, it goes like that.
Yeah, you can really vibe off of someone for sure.
Exactly. Yep. And you can see their body language. You can see, when someone wants to add, there's someone just anxious to add something into the conversation. You don't get that in a virtual environment. So I think that it's important to have both of those factors involved, because otherwise, I don't know how else you expand your learning, because if we're just, relying on folks to watch, hopefully you listen to podcasts. But if you're just relying on only podcasts, then your learning is probably going to suffer.
I need to talk to my son about that. Maybe you need to talk to my son about that.
Oh, is the TIA going to be starting up their own podcast?
No, I need him to not be on a screen.
Oh, no.
24 hours a day. That's a different story. That's a different story.
It's a struggle. I have apps now that tell me, they literally block it on it. Opal is the app, if anybody is curious on how to not spend so much time on social media, but it will lock you down. If you're on social media during a time frame, it will lock you out of it immediately. It won't turn back on.
Let me ask you this, Blythe, though. So you have to use social media for your job, right? And so I imagine it's a bunch of different platforms. It's not just one that you rely on.
I wish it was only one.
Right. You wish it was only one. So how do you save yourself? Because you have to do it for a living.
I prioritize. I say you should only prioritize 2 platforms at once, but I'm a lying liar, and I have all of the platforms. I even just downloaded the new Pinterest, competitor the other day because I like tinkering. I like finding out which ones work well. But I would say my top is LinkedIn for sure. And then after that, I would say Twitter, just because that's I can go and kind of vent. Instagram and Facebook have just kind of fallen to the wayside. It's really for friends and family. But yeah, it's LinkedIn is the number one driver of my leads. So that's where I put a lot of energy into. And I think a lot of the content sucks on LinkedIn. So I think it's easier to stand out. That's why I prioritize.
And why do you think that is? I know this is not the subject of our
Oh no, I love this.
But I'm interested. Why do you think the content is not as good? Is it just because we have people who that's not their main focus, that they don't think about marketing in that way?
I think it's LinkedIn, the platform just hasn't done a very good job at combating against some spammy tactics.
Oh.
So one use case, for example, is what's long been a problem on the platform is LinkedIn pods, where it's like these LinkedIn groups that only exist just to promote each other's posts. So what happens is they post something and then they go to their pod and they say, hey, go to and this exists on Instagram as well. I think Instagram's actually cracked down on that a lot. But LinkedIn has not cracked down on that. And I think until Microsoft bought them, they just kind of had a free-for-all, and it was really just the platform just to go look for jobs. But now, since Microsoft has purchased them, especially during the pandemic, you have all these career people that are now working from home. They're looking for that, sort of water cooler talk.
Sure.
That's where I think a lot of the value of LinkedIn really emerged. And now we're starting to see a lot of the investments into the platform itself. They have a fantastic newsletter platform that I think is better than really any other newsletter platform out there. And then your videos and the reach of a post. So say, for example, like Twitter, the shelf life of a tweet is around 2 minutes. If it, doesn't do anything, then it's probably just going to be, take it out behind the barn and bury it. But with LinkedIn, if your post is halfway decent, it could stick around for a week. Yeah. And that is a big, as somebody who's always trying to optimize their time and their energy, that's where I find sort of the most enjoyment or the most satisfaction is being able to put quality work into something, post it to LinkedIn, and have it stick around a lot longer than it would, say, on another platform.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have seen sometimes people like to post that I made like 6 months ago. Like, I don't understand your algorithm. How did you finally see that? I don't get it. I don't get how it works. I really don't.
Well, it could be them seeing something maybe you like to post or something, which is also unique to LinkedIn that you could have liked to post. And then if they see that, then that's like a signal to the algorithm, and they go look at your profile. Then they see, oh, well, that person likes that person. Yeah. Let's show them, a successful post the next time they're on the app or something like that. I don't really know all about how it works.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know. What? You have to tell me this, Blythe. What is your favorite thing on LinkedIn to make fun of?
Oh my God.
Like the memes,
So there's a dark side to LinkedIn. So I'm part of a Reddit. I don't know if you go on Reddit at all, but there is a subgroup called LinkedIn Lunatics. So I see a lot of stuff that goes on, and it is absolutely insane. But I will say, I think the thing that I was given advice about a year ago that said, you have to have like a 1 through 10 cringe level with LinkedIn, and what your level of cringe that you're going to be okay with posting to LinkedIn. And so I try to follow that as far as like my own posting strategy, and then the posts that I interact with. If you're bringing real like education and value to the platform, that's something that I'm going to applaud. That's something I'm going to engage with. But if it's just something, I think it was one time it's so cringy, but this girl, she was dressed in like, kind of a suggestive outfit, and she was posing seductively like on a railroad track. And I was like,
oh no.
I was like, oh, that's super cringy. I would never do that. So that's like one harsh end. I only saw that one time. So that's, thank God. So that's like one end of the spectrum. But then on the other end of the spectrum, just little things that would annoy me are like too many, like if you have like 40 emojis in one post, I'm not reading it. It drives me nuts. Yeah, but that's more of like a personal thing. What about you? What are you like on LinkedIn? What are your pet peeves?
Yeah, I like it, and I like it and I hate it at the same time, which is the people who are like, I can't believe I got this award, you guys. I am so humbled to receive this award. Yeah, that's why you're
Yeah.
announcing it to the 5,000
Right.
people that you are LinkedIn with. You're very humbled. Very humbled. I
Humbled and
love it though.
honored.
It's so delicious.
That's like the level of that's maybe like a 5 or a 6 on the LinkedIn lunatics subreddit group, because there are some worse ones.
Are there? God, I got to get on this group.
It's really fun to see, but that's also that brings up kind of I guess the next challenge that maybe like brokers and just freight brokerages in general are dealing with is the sales and the marketing aspect of themselves. You guys also have a great sort of sales and marketing education system within the TIA. Give us a little bit of glimpse into what kind of practices that the TIA, I guess, believes in enough to put some educational resources behind.
Sure. So we have these day-long sessions before the conference even begins, called pre-cons. So funny, it's so creative. But we have a couple of them with Dr. Jim Kinney, who was a professor for many years and now is a consultant to many of our, fabulous brokerages out there. And he makes it an interactive session about how you can achieve what you need to achieve. And it is not just making cold calls. It's really, I think, and he hasn't taught me this so much as I've just sort of absorbed it from him, is that you've got to figure out what are you going to be good at? And then how are you going to develop the resources that sustains you being good at that? Some of our best members and our most successful members found their niche and they developed their relationships on the carrier side and on the shipper side that sustain that niche. And they have been inordinately successful, and they also are well respected because they really achieved what they're good at. And so if you're just wildly, making calls, trying to figure out if any of these shippers will take you, that is the wrong approach. That's not what leads to long-term success. It's really trying to be, I hate this word because I think it's overused, but trying to be intentional about it and trying to be conscientious about it. As we joked about, nobody reads anymore, but it's really that kind of mindset of like, how would I study for a test? It's sort of like, how would I study to do well in this industry? And what I appreciate about it is so thoughtful.
And so so you're coming at it from the sales, the thoughtfulness, and the being in I get not intensive, but being intentful and authentic, for another buzzword to throw in there. But it is true, having those different sets of almost like pillars of your own authenticity of what you're going to follow before you reach out and do business with anyone, I think is important to declare. But as we start adding in, you had mentioned freight tech earlier, as we start adding in all of these different technology standpoints, especially with AI coming more and more into the mix, how do we, or I guess maybe the brokerage industry in general, how do we maintain that level of connectiveness when we have all of these tools and these social media platforms that are trying to drive our attention away from the end goal, if that makes sense? Like, do you see a lot of the freight tech coming into the space as a good thing or a much needed thing, or something that could negatively affect that relationship building that is so crucial to this industry?
Yeah, I think it's a fabulous thing. I think it certainly, we talked back about fraud. It's sort of like that double-edged sword in that we have technology to detect fraud, but we also, because we're digitizing freight, there's more fraud to be had. I would say this: using technology supplements the good work that you need to do in building relationships. It certainly doesn't replace it. I'm not going to name any names of companies, but I think the headlines that we've seen from various company ventures and mergers, et cetera, is a recognition of that. And I would say this, maybe because I am, Gen X, and I don't trust technology, but I do think we're reaching sort of a kind of a capstone point where people are really frustrated when they use an app and they cannot talk to a human being. And it's fine if it goes right, but it doesn't always go right. Mm-hmm. And so when it goes wrong, you think, dear God, is there literally someone alive that I can talk to? And to me, brokerages, by and large, those who are our members, are smart enough to recognize that those relationships will continue to matter. Now, maybe that doesn't mean they call them every day. Maybe that just means they, instant message them, or they email them, or whatever. But knowing that there is a person who that you can call if there is an issue, that is critical. And I think that will continue to be critical, and maybe more so in light of all this fraud and in light of all the sort of app fatigue.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good way of putting it, because it's, especially in like the marketing side of things. I mean, I kind of bill myself as like a one-person marketing team. And especially with AI, all of these tools coming into the mix, it almost feels so overwhelming. And then I look at the freight side of things, and it feels like that same thing is happening to brokers as well, where they're having to look at all of these different technology solutions and try to pick the one that fits best within their work processes. But how do you really know unless you actually go out and use the tool and hope that it, can maintain that relationship with the customer? Is I guess, are brokers sharing that similar frustration?
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Particularly, again, we talked about the smaller members or those who are just starting out. It's incredibly overwhelming. How could you possibly know? There are big names out there in the freight tech space, but is that big name for you? Are you scaled enough to even accept this big freight in your life? And so, not to be a shill, although that's part of my job, but we do have, one of the conferences we have is really solely focused on technology, best practices, what is out there, and also what's up and coming. We don't want to just have the stuff that's already established. I mean, that's important too, but there are so many smart tech people who are coming into this space, which kind of makes me feel popular, not me personally, but us, because the tech people are cool.
Yeah.
And if they're coming into our space, that goes to show you that the industry is getting bigger and more successful. And so we have a conference dedicated to just those issues, because to your point, how on earth can you determine what it is you need, particularly if you're small and just growing? Now, the larger guys may have their own, proprietary tech, or have relationships with the larger tech folks that they, have this integration that they can work through. But that's not always the case. And there's always a new person you need to know about.
And because also if you make the wrong investment in tech, it could be extremely detrimental, not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a time standpoint. You invest a lot of time into learning these platforms, and if it doesn't work out, then it's a sunk cost fallacy where you just keep, trying to use that software and you don't necessarily need it anymore. How are you, how is like the TIA almost like advising folks on how to use different technology or make those purchasing decisions?
Yeah, we have a technology committee, and that technology committee has three missions. One is to develop some sort of best practices around cybersecurity. One is to come up with the agenda for our Technovations conference I was just speaking of. And the other is to really think through what are the kinds of best practices, not as it relates to cybersecurity, but as the use of technology. But we want to be technology neutral. There are a lot of our associate members who belong to the association. We don't want to make anyone mad or favor one over another.
Sure.
They're all beautiful children, and we love them all equally. But that is a mission that they take seriously. I don't think it's in our benefit to provide, you should use this, you should do this. It's more, here's what are the resources that are available, and we're happy to connect you with someone who can explain it more. To me, just as we talked about developing your niche, developing what technology you need can be a very personal thing as to what business you're trying to build.
I love that. Very well said. And as we sort of talk about, the role of the broker and the role of technology, how do you see the role of the broker evolving in, say, the coming months or even the coming years? Is it going to be a better working environment, or maybe a more streamlined? How do you see it playing out?
Gosh, well, I was talking to a member of ours last week who says, not world domination, I'm kidding, but really believes that the freight brokerage industry is going to get even more important and more significant. And the reason is this: because we are able to find that sort of magic capacity and pull it out of a hat, and because we have the relationships with the shippers. This has always been the case. but it's become more complicated. The supply chain has become more complicated. And so we are providing a kind of a seamless path to get through that very complicated supply chain. With the amount of freight we've had over the last 2.5 years, that obviously was our core function. And I do think, even though we're in the midst of a freight, what do we call it? Trough, slump, whatever.
Yeah. I like trough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are always going to buy things, and people are always going to, and they're not going to want to be bothered to leave their homes in a lot of ways. So there's going to be so much freight still coming at us. And so I just think that life is going to get more complicated. And so we're going to be more and more essential.
100%. Now, as we sort of talk about, we've mentioned a lot of technology throughout this. I thought it would be if you would partake in a little chat GPT game with me.
Oh God, I'm scared.
So you are the second person to take part in this. I actually talked to Erin Van Zeeland over
she's
at
the best.
Yes, and so she was the first one I kind of tried this on. So I had ChatGPT write a bio about her and you, and we're gonna test the accuracy on this. So I'm gonna read the first little bullet point, and you tell me if it's right or wrong. And it says, Ann Rinkie is a certified yoga instructor and has taught yoga classes in her spare time for over a decade. She has also served as a mentor to new yoga instructors. So that's a fail.
God, that's amazing.
There has to be another Ann Rinkie out there.
There must be another Ann Rinkie out there.
So that was an F grade from ChatGPT. Now the second one, it says, before entering the transportation industry, Ann worked in the environmental policy and served as a policy analyst at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Nope.
False. See, this is why you got to fact
check ChatGPT. Get your head in the game.
And the next one, Ann is a recipient of the Women in Trucking Association's Influential Women in Trucking Award, which recognizes women who have made a significant impact in the transportation industry.
Not yet. I'm not saying it's not going to ever happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Maybe they're telling the future. So 0 for 3 on ChatGPT so far. Okay. All right, next one. Ann is a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion in the logistics industry and has been actively involved in TIA's efforts to promote greater representation and equity for women and underrepresented groups.
Well, I don't want to make myself sound like non-heroic, but I don't think I've done enough. Let's just say that. Let's just say I have not done enough in that area.
So we'll give it a C on that one. Yeah. And then the last one, this is a bold claim. So let's hope. It says, Ann is a native of Maryland and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the University of Maryland and a Master's of Science degree in environmental science and policy from George Mason University.
I'm from Maryland. I grew up in Maryland.
Ooh, so F. No, this is I'm calling this ChatGPT fact or faux. This is definitely a faux one, not
that
accurate.
That is hilarious. What did it say? What does it say about you?
I haven't asked it yet.
You raise cats. It says you raise cats and you're an acrobat.
That is right. There's got to be another Ann Rinkie out there that is stealing your yoga thunder a little bit.
I tell you, she for the sounds EPA. Relaxed. She sounds environmental. She sounds great.
Now this is I think this is a great segue into sort of the mindful last couple questions that I have. It's the dangers of using maybe AI in freight. Have you seen any kind of use cases or cautionary tales of using AI in freight besides this interview?
Well, I'm terrified of all of that stuff because it's like, are we going to be overrun by psychopathic robots? And I do feel that because they don't have a soul, but that's separate apart from that. Here's something to be concerned about. Because AI can make it so that a phone number can appear from anywhere, right? An area code can look like it's from Illinois, but actually it's in Moldova. That is something that is really, really scary because if you're doing business with someone who you think is US based or domestic, whether it's a domestic carrier or, someone who's saying they're a carrier, but actually a dispatch service or broker who's not really a broker. That to me is a consequence of AI and all the kind of developments that you can by just creating an untraceable entity. I mean, untraceable and subject to no jurisdiction, right? I mean, do you think Interpol is going to get involved in some, if there's some sort of fraudulent entity based out of a different country? No. I mean, they'll say this is a commercial dispute. To me, that I think is sort of the downside, the dark side of where we can go with AI.
I even heard a story the other day of this AI sort of creator that I follow, and they have a lot of great news coverage. But he said that he's created a safe word with his family because of all of the spoofing that can go on, not just from a phone number or an address, but can go on with your own voice. And videos. So now he has a safe word with his family that if anybody ever calls him or calls their family and they're in danger, then they have the safe word that they use. So, that's sort of another, I guess, AI tip or cautionary tale that we have to.
I got to add this to my list of worries. I already have enough, Blythe. I don't know.
Sorry. But hopefully it'll keep you safe. It's almost like vetting the carrier before you put them on a load. We're preventing the double brokering within families here.
There you go. Exactly right. All right. Is this your real voice, Blythe?
Right. What's the safe word? All right. And last question. Obviously, the two big conferences coming up. You got one in a few weeks. We're recording this in early April. And then also you have one in the fall. Give us the lowdown. Give users or listeners a chance to register and attend and take part in the TIA.
Sure. So go to tianet.org, and then you'll see meetings, and you'll see our annual conference. And yes, registration for our annual policy forum just went live. And this is when you go and meet the guys and gals on Capitol Hill. God help us all. You need to educate them. Please come up and help educate them. They need to hear from you. So that's what we do in September.
Oh, perfect. And then you got the other one coming up in a couple weeks. That's the big one. That's the big, not to say that they're not big, but you got the other big one coming up in a couple weeks. Is registration still available for that one as well?
It is. Registration is available. Awesome. We really surpassed even last year's attendance record. So we're very excited about the energy in the space. So April 19th through the 21st in the magic of Orlando, Florida. Who doesn't want to be in Orlando, Florida? It's the happiest place on earth.
Heck yeah, I love it. I'm an annual pass holder for now at Disney, so probably won't be for very much longer. But that's a story for another show. All right, and where I know you got to run, so where can folks follow your work, follow the TIA, become a member, all that good stuff?
Yes, so please, you can always contact me, Reinke at tianet.org. I'm on LinkedIn also. It's like a bunch of backslashes and some initials if you want to find me, but you can just find me on LinkedIn. And then that's really it, Blythe. I'm not on the social media. That's it. That's what we got.
That's a good thing. You're taking my advice.
I'm taking your advice. I really am. But I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you all.
And we'll link to your LinkedIn in the show notes just to make it easy for everybody out there. But Ann, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll have to do this again in the future, and hopefully ChatGPT will have a little bit improvement on your bio. So thank you again.
Thank you, Blythe. I appreciate it. I can't wait to hear about your cats.
Oh, no.